Climate change, it's real and it's human-made. Well, look, to be fair, we're not totally sure of that because scientists only put the probability at 95% or greater that man is responsible. But ice cores are melting, sea temperatures are rising, extreme storms are becoming more regular. Sounds real, doesn't it? Unless, of course, you're the President of the United States. So can the planet be saved by central banks? Can the arbiters of monetary control also be the ones who ultimately control the climate? Sounds like a pretty big call, doesn't it? But we'll give it some consideration today on the Debunking Economics podcast with Professor Steve Keen. And I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. So, Steve, the idea for today's discussion comes, well, it's thanks to Alexander Leopold, who's a Steve Keen supporter on Patreon, who wrote to us about a speech from a member of the ECB, the European Central Bank. It was a speech on monetary policy and climate change. It was actually for a conference a few weeks ago, which was called Scaling Up Green Finance, the Role of Central Banks. I guess before we look at what's said, let's look at, whether central banks are really the culprits here, because they have ignored climate change so far. Their focus obviously has been on sustainable growth and ensuring that, there's no huge fluctuations in prices. With that sort of focus, obviously they will have helped contribute to climate change.
Yeah, I mean, they've been their whole objective has been to achieve a rate of real economic growth for the advanced OECD nations of 3% per annum, and their target when you're looking in developing economies has been of the order of 5% per annum.
Yeah,
and they've done that without any regard to what that might mean in terms of the sustainability in the genuine sense of the economy, given the impact that puts on the climate.
Well, maybe now is about the time that they start doing that, although I wonder whether their thinking is along the right lines. So Benoit Cœuré is the guy from the ECB. He says central banks and policymakers deal with two categories of shocks. The first is demand-driven. If things slow down, then obviously inflation goes down, growth slumps, unemployment goes up. So they lower interest rates, so people have more money, companies can invest more, and it's all magically fixed so long as we ignore the fact that, if they pushed interest rates lower, then asset prices go up. The second category is, he says, supply side shocks, where inflation can go down, but can go up, I should say, but output goes down. And he's saying climate change can fit into this category as a supply side shock. Except, of course, climate change isn't a shock; it's here to stay, isn't it?
This is the thing. I mean, when I saw that Alexander sent it through to us, and I just think, oh my God, I can see exactly where this is coming from. And the whole idea that you can resolve the problems in any system into shocks to technology and shocks to demand is the thinking that they have in their models of the economy they call dynamic, stochastic, general equilibrium models.
Yeah.
Where the only two things that can cause changes both in the short and the long run, for this case, and some of the more extreme versions, the only thing that can cause things to be disturbed from the path of equilibrium they presume the economy is on is some unexpected change to people's tastes, which is where they talk about the demand shocks. But the other side is unexpected changes to technology, where they talk about things, they try to bring that in terms of climate change. And otherwise, the system sails on in perfect equilibrium through time. And that is their vision of the economy. And heaven, holy mother of God, if they're going to apply that to the climate itself, it's worse than useless. We're doomed. Yeah, well,
are they? I mean, it's not really so. If it sailed on in equilibrium, obviously we wouldn't need central banks to handhold us and try and correct all of these fluctuations. But is it on the supply side? On the demand side? I guess we really should be focusing more on the supply side if that's what they're calling climate change. But on the demand side, it's not just change in taste, is it? Because, I mean, we can have demand fall because, for example, we're holding too much debt, so we decide we're going to spend less. And so that sends a shock through the economy.
You're in the wrong universe. I'm sorry. That doesn't apply in our universe. In
their universe.
In our universe, or their universe, of course. I'm speaking on their behalf at the moment. I'm sure they'd enjoy that. In their universe, credit plays no role. So therefore, there can't be a credit shock.
Right.
So if there was...
So demand will always hold up. We're never going to stop buying stuff unless we're mad. That's basically their angle.
Well, their angle is that you can resolve the world into two halves. I think it's just a wonderful send-up of of the state of modern macroeconomics in a tweet yesterday, and it did summarize the state of economics in less than 280 characters. And that was, it said, microeconomics is the study of two people interacting, meaning consumers and producers. Macroeconomics is the study of one person interacting. Huh? What the hell does he mean by that? When you look at the models, they model the economy as if there is a single household. Mm-hmm. They're going to jump at me on this one. This is where they start from: a single household consisting of a worker capitalist who owns the firm in which he or she, or let's say it works because we're talking androgyny here, owns the factory in which it works, and makes a trade-off between leisure and income based on the wage that it offers itself from this factory. And on we go. And it is a fantasy world that I think Ptolemy, if you show the old astronomer Ptolemy, he'd say, you're joking. It can't be that stupid a system. This is somebody who invented a model where the Earth's the center of the universe and everything revolves in perfect circles around it. At least Ptolemy's stuff was halfway realistic compared to what economists have these days. So they literally imagine you can model the entire economy. They start from a single so-called representative agent. The representative agent owning the factory, 100% ownership of the firm, which operates, by the way, in perfect competition, which is good fun since you've got a monopoly operating in perfect competition, but let's not go there, Melda. And then making a decision to supply or leisure or labour, and of course, getting again the profits and the wages go back to the same household. So there's no income distribution issues to worry about. There's no class struggle because you are the entire social class.
Right.
Absolutely ludicrous bunkum.
Well, you have the competition because the person you're talking about is bipolar, so he's competing against himself, his inner thoughts.
That's possibly true. I hadn't thought of that possible.
But he destroys himself, though. He doesn't get the equilibrium as a result of all that. But look, let's get back.
Yeah, multiple personality in equilibrium. That's feasible, yeah.
But it is all about the Earth. I mean, that is the one thing. And Benoit Cœuré said in his speech in Climate Change, droughts and heat... So this is where he's talking about the supply side shocks. Droughts and heat waves often lead to shortfalls, putting upward pressure on food prices. Now, Alexander Leopold, our listener, said what he failed to mention, of course, was that what boosted crop prices in 2007 to 2008 and again in 2010 to 12 was extensive speculation on crops and other commodities. It was not caused by all the divine forces he blames as being responsible. And according to the DSG equilibrium theory that you were talking about, this shouldn't have happened in the first place. I mean, but that is the point, isn't it? This whole idea that, if you've got low interest rates, that causes speculation with a limited commodity like housing or land or crops or any natural resources. We can borrow money on the cheap, so we speculate on something which has an upper limit to the supply, and that is part of the problem.
Absolutely, and that's the real world. And this is where we have got a. We all know. By the way, I absolutely loved your tweet this morning about Donald Trump. Okay. I want to repeat what you wrote. I mean, it's perfect because it's about climate change as well.
Oh, well, I've got to find it. So Donald Trump, let me see if I can find it on Twitter. So, so Donald Trump wrote, and the man is mad, isn't he? I mean, we were giving him the benefit of the doubt for a while, but he said, brutal and extended cold blasts could shatter all records.
In capitals,
all records. Whatever happened to global warming? So I just replied, this is your best right yet. Who writes your material? He or she is hilarious. But does the president know about this spoof account? And of course, it's not a spoof account. This is Donald Trump writing in his own.
One. I mean, there is a spoof account, which one of my good friends, Louis-Philippe Franchon, mistakenly believed was the real deal a couple of weeks ago. And I had to point out to him, mate, you are Canadian. You do understand satire, don't you? This was a satire account. But you're right, that you can't send up somebody who writes stuff like that.
No. So look, let's get back to the issue again. This whole thing about the fact that, so is that the main problem that with the economy, and what's the role of central banks in all of this?
It's absolutely irrelevant to the real economy. It is totally distracting us from what's actually happening in the real economy to even think that you can describe it in terms of an equilibrium system subject to exogenous shock. Yeah, This is the travesty of this is that we are now approaching a complete systemic breakdown in the climate, and I've given up trying to be reasonable about this. That is what we face, right. And the whole idea that you can treat this as a disturbance from equilibrium, because when you talk about shocks, and this is the thing which they're not considering, a shock like a drought has to have a balancing shock on the other side of a flood. In other words, what you've got is a distribution of rainfall, and the way they model shocks is a random process where there's some mean and some standard deviation to it. And so in the case of the weather, if they actually did try to incorporate the climate in their models and doing it the way this, and pardon me, mate, he's obviously a highly intelligent person, but he's been trained to be an intellectual moron. The guy who came out with that comment from the ECB. The way he'd actually incorporated that in the model would be to bring in another Gaussian variable, a variable normally distributed with a mean and standard deviation and so on, of the level of temperature, or another one of the level of rainfall. Now, to say there's a shock and it's normally distributed, then when there's drought, there'll be flood. When there's hot, there'll be cold.
So does that mean that central banks, by and large, because they are so entrenched in this idea of equilibrium, they're incapable of systematic thinking? And how do central banks need to change if they are going to realize that the climate is changing and they could play a part in it? Just how big a shift in the thinking of central bankers does there have to be before that can be realized? They're big questions that we answer in the full version of this podcast. To hear it, you need to subscribe. You can subscribe at debunkingeconomics.com by choosing one of the subscription options in the right-hand side, or by becoming a supporter of Steve on Patreon. Pay $10 or more each month to support Steve's work, and you get access to this and all the other podcasts in this series. Go to patreon.com/Prof Steve Keen, and hopefully we'll see you back here again soon. Thanks for listening.